Aristotle believes the forms are received in matter as bodily things are composed of form and matter. Aquinas explains the existence of the form in matter happens by way of co-principles. One, the essence provides the form for the matter, and two, simultaneously, the essence receives and limits the thing's existence to what it is. Created things participate in their existence from outside themselves, as opposed to God, whose existence is what he is. A created substance is an existing instance of an essence, the something that exists and acts according to its nature. Aquinas believes essences are abstracted by the intellect from particular sense objects as an intelligible species knowable in the first act of man's intellectual soul, understanding. This is the act by which we understand universal concepts. This act is performed by the active intellect, which understands the universal concept by way of the intelligible species. The word species here refers to natural kinds with an essence, not just a category created by the mind. So in Aquinas' moderate realist epistemology, we know the form of things in themselves and discover the essence of things and their relationships in the relational analogical hierarchy of being by understanding, judging, and reasoning. However, the essence can never be completely known to us in any way as the Creator knows it. The artist knows their work like no one else can know it. But what we know of the essence is still real. Now let's look at Occam's approach again, after we discuss some influences leading up to his idea of conceptualist nominalism. First, let's look at John Duns Scotus' views on the nature of being that heavily influence Occam's approach to the problem of universals. Duns Scotus, who was 24 when Aquinas died, lived from 1250 to 1308. Duns Scotus denies Aquinas' analogy of being, and with it the analogical use of language. This means that there is no true distinction into categories of created and uncreated being. God's mode of being and the created mode of being are not different, because Scotus denies that only God possesses existence. However, he says God has more being, and the power of being which prevents monism. But he asserts being other than God is not dependent upon God's existence. This denies created being is inherently revelatory of God and teleological toward God by way of a creature's essence and dependent existence. Scotus believes being and language are univocal. In an essay on the effects of nominalism on modern philosophy, S. Joel Garver writes, God and creation are situated within one extension of being, with God being more powerful in every respect. God becomes viewed as a being who is univocally like us within a self-enclosed system of nature. This identifies God's being with the omnipotent divine will and provides a foundation for divine voluntarism. This raises such questions as, can God make 2 + 2 = 5? And can God do evil? Because his being does not define what is good. Consequently, in this conceptualism of God's relationship to the world, grace becomes viewed as external to the order of nature and superadded upon it. Faith and reason are viewed as separated ways of knowing, not ways that mutually presuppose one another. In voluntarism, one cannot depend upon human or divine reason as a source for moral obligation, but only on divine will, which is only knowable by faith, separated from reason. The imbalance and false dichotomy in this approach leads to depending only on human will for obligation. Later in the political philosophies of Machiavelli, Hobbes, and the social contract. Voluntarism also becomes the basis for separation of philosophy from theology in the modern era. Being and nature are viewed as self-contained, where philosophy is prior to and setting the conditions of theology. In this process, religion is pushed to the margins of what is human and natural, and the secular society becomes the predominant view. William of Ockham, even further than Scotus, he moves to add that language and reality are equivocal. This means things that exist are all intrinsically different from one another and do not only share a common existence, but their being is completely unique without similarity. Like in Duns Scotus, no creature's existence is dependent on the causality of creation. Rather, it is immediately dependent on the divine will, in keeping with divine voluntarism. This also denies all secondary causation within creatures to other creatures. In language, names of categories such as animal or human do not refer to real natures in the world, but to ideas formed in the mind. Thought is seen as a mechanistic grouping of atomistic objects without natures. The object of thought is in the mind, not in the outside world. The division of the mind from outside world is carried forward in modern philosophy by Descartes, as material objects are stripped of their teleology. A consequence of voluntarism is that, since no essences exist, it means a natural law, based on the analogy of being, is not a reliable source of obligation. The denial of essences in the real world leads down a logical path of deconstruction of the moderate realist view of Aquinas. This denial proceeds by both a conceptualist path and a more pure nominalist path in modern philosophy, following Occam and Descartes. The path of conceptualism is found in the idealism of Locke and Kant. They believe universal concepts are formed by the mind, with the object of knowledge being our own ideas, rather than forms of natural substances in the epistemology of Aquinas. The idealist universal concepts are formed mechanistically in the mind, with no basis in reality outside the mind, denying essences as a basis for the similarity in things. Empiricism is the second path. Empiricism is a pure form of nominalism found in Hume and Hobbes. Hume and Hobbes deny the existence of universal concepts and limit knowledge to sense experience. Their approach leaves little distinction between human knowledge and the higher animals. Both the idealist and empirist approach follow a path of deconstruction of the moderate realist view of Aquinas. Their denial of the existence of essences comes as a package deal, and the denial of causality, teleology, and natural law. Since essences don't exist, secondary causality is denied. The denial of final causality and teleology proceeds from the denial of the analogy of being and the real distinction in mode of being and existence between the creator and the created. This also leads to a denial of the power of man's conscience in Hume. In what he terms as the natural fallacy, he denies man can determine what we ought to do based on respect for what a thing is. This is a denial of a hierarchical order of being, and Aquinas' concept of the natural law by which man discerns moral norms through the natural powers of man's conscience. The denial of a discernible scale of natural values from the ordered hierarchy of goods prevents moral norms that are objective, universal, and intelligible. Because essences don't exist, the basis for the natural functionality of a thing doesn't exist, which makes a natural law not possible. However, The naturalistic fallacy is itself a fallacy. It is common experience that we have the natural equipment to know right from wrong. For example, we know by nature that killing of innocent people is wrong, that intentional deception of those who have a right to the truth is wrong. In Aquinas' moderate realist approach, the knowledge of essences is a key factor in man's ability to judge right from wrong in the conscience. The knowledge of essences is necessary for us to judge the value of one created thing from another. Natural substances are present in the world and are known in the act of understanding. As discussed previously, understanding proceeds by way of abstraction, in which the form of the natural object is received in the intellect without matter. The abstracted essence of the object has an immaterial existence in the intellect, in which the object known is present and known by the intellect, uniting the knower with the thing known. The degree of the essence of a thing participates analogically in the fullness of God's being. The degree the essence of a thing participates analogically in the fullness of God's being determines the degree of its dignity. The conscience has the natural habit of judging right from wrong in practical situations. For example, a human person's dignity comes from their possession of a spiritual intellect and the spiritual power of free will. Whereas man possesses these powers analogous to God's intellect and free will, a living plant doesn't possess these higher attributes of being. So the human being possesses a higher form of being than the plant, and by the natural law, the life of the human being should be respected above the life of a plant. Thus, the moral norm is that a plant can be a means for self-preservation of a human as food. Voluntarism, as discussed before, proceeds from nominalism and denies that we can determine an ought from the dignity of what something is. Let me now summarize why the epistemological moderate realist view of Aquinas is a better way to know the world than Occam's nominalist view. Here is a chart depicting the effect of the moderate realist approach and the nominalist approach in the main areas of philosophy. My contention is that the key point of disagreement between the moderate realist and nominalist approach is their metaphysics. When metaphysics is legitimate, the rest of philosophy depends on it, because thought and language themselves depend on metaphysics. First, let's look at their differences in metaphysics. The moderate realist approach says that universals are real, and that individuals are also real. In terms of the composition of the individuals, universals are the forms of individual entities. On the other hand, the nominalist approach says that universals are not objectively real. In review, one of the main objections to nominalism is that we speak using universal terms, not particular terms. A sentence that denies all trees are the same presupposes by the universal context of the word tree in the sentence that they are. This is self-contradictory. The denial of real forms that are knowable has a major effect in all areas of philosophy. In epistemology, the moderate realist approach says that reason knows reality, both form and matter, by abstracting and inferring from sensating. The nominalist approach says that reason is deceptive when it tries to go beyond sensation. This is the basis for skepticism of man's knowledge, which leads to a lowering of the assessment of man's range of reason. Nominalism leads to a denial of metaphysical reasoning. However, nominalism and conceptualism don't present a satisfactory